My mother's hands shoved me through the doorway, and the soles of my shoes slipped against the wet boards as I stumbled into the storm. At midnight, the rain fell in sheets across the yard, soaking the porch until it shone like black glass. Her voice cut sharper than the rain, telling me I was no longer hers, that I had humiliated the man she chose over me. Behind her words, I saw him leaning against the car. His arms folded, his grin calm and satisfied, like this moment had been rehearsed. My bag was still inside. My coat hung on the chair I had pulled out for him at dinner. Now the door slammed, the lock sliding into place, and the last warmth of the house vanished. I stood in the downpour, my hair plastered to my face, water sliding down my spine like icy fingers. The driveway light buzzed above, flickering until it cast me half in shadow, half in light, as though even the world could not decide whether I belonged. My chest ached, not from the cold, but from the betrayal, a sharp weight pressing into the center of me. She was my mother, the one whose lullabies I once clung to in the dark, yet now her voice was the one that declared me unwanted. I pressed my palm to the locked door and felt nothing move on the other side. Was I truly her daughter, or had I only been a stranger all along? I walked until the rain thinned to a drizzle, the streets empty except for the echo of my own footsteps. My sweater clung heavy against my skin, each thread carrying the weight of water and shame. Streetlights flickered along the road, buzzing with that faint electric hum, and I kept moving because stopping meant feeling. My legs carried me to the old bus station on the edge of town, a place I had passed 100 times but never entered. Tonight it became shelter. Inside, the air smelled of rust and wet concrete, a mix of oil and stale cigarettes. Rows of metal chairs sat cold and hollow, their backs scarred with scratches. I chose the farthest corner and curled up against the wall, the chill of the tiles biting through me. My teeth knocked together, not just from the cold, but from the hollow space that opened inside me. I thought about her face, how quickly it hardened, how easily she closed the door, as though I were a neighbor's stray left at the step. My whole life, I had carried the hope that if I tried harder, she would see me. I stayed quiet when words burned my throat. I smiled when I wanted to cry. I did every chore before she could ask. Yet, it never filled the gap. Tonight proved it. She had chosen silence and a man's smirk over her daughter's voice. I leaned my head back against the wall, listening to the slow drip of water from the ceiling, each drop striking the floor like a clock ticking down. My mind searched for blame. Did I cross a line by speaking the truth at dinner, by not bowing to his arrogance? Or was it always waiting this moment when they would cast me out? The more I searched, the less answer I found. My stomach twisted empty, but heavier still was the thought that maybe there was no place that held my name. Outside the station windows, the rain slowed, leaving streaks across the glass that looked like veins on fragile skin. A bus never came, only the sound of trucks in the distance moving toward destinations where someone was expected. I pulled my knees close, trying to find warmth in myself. All I could feel was the echo of her words circling inside you are no longer mine. If my own mother could abandon me in the dark, then what was I now but a shadow in a town that had already turned its back? At dawn, the rain gave way to a thin, gray sky, the kind that carried no warmth, only a tired light that painted the town in faded shades. I sat stiff on the bus station chair, my body aching from the cold, and my clothes still damp, my hair clinging to the side of my face. The echo of her words had not left me. They ran through me like a chant I could not silence. I was not hers. She had said it with a finality that cut deeper than any strike. as I stood to stretch the world, tilted slightly hunger, making me dizzy. My pocket held nothing but a single crumpled receipt from the grocery where I had once stood beside her bagging food for the man who now leaned smug against the car while I was thrown into the night. My steps dragged me toward a diner 2 blocks down. The windows were clouded with steam, the glow of neon still faint from the night. I pressed my forehead to the glass for a moment, inhaling the scent of fried potatoes and coffee. Inside, people laughed, their forks clinking against plates, and I realized I had never felt more like a ghost. I turned away before anyone could see me. The cold air filled my lungs, sharp as needles. Every corner of the town reminded me of her, the way she once carried me into the library when I was small, the way her hand once pressed against my back during school concerts. Had I imagined those gestures? Were they just fragments of duty, never truly love? My chest tightened at the thought, a burning that rose to my throat. I tried to swallow it down, but the memory of last night would not let me. The dinner table, the sharp taste of meatloaf burned at the edges, the flicker of candlelight, because she wanted it to look warm for neighbors. He had boasted about his promotion, his voice filling every space. I had only spoken once, one simple correction, reminding him of a detail he twisted, and suddenly the room froze. His eyes sliced toward me, his jaw tightening. Then came the smirk, the one that told me he would turn this against me. She looked at me then, not with defense, not even with hesitation, but with accusation. In her eyes, I was the problem, the ungrateful daughter, making her man look small. The crash came quick, my elbow hitting the glass of water spilling across the table, soaking the cloth she prized. That was the end. My words were drowned in her fury. She had always chosen sides, but that night she did so with a cruelty that left no doubt I was an outsider in my own bloodline. The sound of the rain last night blended in my mind with the sound of dishes shattering a storm both inside and out. As I walked now, the sun barely climbing, I realized there had never been a place for me at that table. It had been his seat, his stories, his laughter that filled her ears. I was the silence, the pause, the one who learned to disappear, to keep peace. But peace had never come. Each memory lined up like broken glass, his hand brushing against my shoulder too long when she turned away. His jokes at my expense always brushed off as humor. The times I begged her with my eyes to notice, to defend me, to see through him, and she never did. Instead, she scolded me, told me to respect him, to learn my place. That night was not a surprise. It was an ending long prepared. The ache in my stomach twisted tighter, yet my mind replayed it all with merciless clarity. I thought about the way the door shut, the metallic sound of the lock sliding. That was her final word, louder than the shouting. A door between us, a border that told me I was no longer welcome, not even as flesh of her flesh. I passed a storefront where mannequins stood dressed in neat clothes, their eyes blank. I saw myself reflected in the glass hair-tangled skin, pale clothes clinging, and I almost laughed at the absurdity. I looked like someone cast out of a story, a character misplaced. But the weight in my chest made it real. My steps carried me toward the edge of town, where the fields opened wide. The sky stretched low clouds heavy, and the silence there was different. It was not the silence of rejection, but the silence of absence, of being unseen by anyone. I sank into the damp grass by the roadside, pressing my palms into the earth, as though grounding myself would remind me I was still real. The memory of his grin burned behind my eyelids. That satisfaction, that tiny lift at the corner of his mouth, as if he had finally won some battle I did not know we were fighting. He wanted me gone. and she delivered me to him. The betrayal was not only in her words, but in her obedience, her willingness to erase me to please him. I clenched my fists until mud filled the lines of my hands. The anger surged hot, then fell back into exhaustion. The cycle repeated: rage, sorrow, emptiness. I asked myself why I had spoken at dinner, why I had not kept quiet. Maybe silence would have bought me more nights under that roof. Yet another voice inside whispered that it would not have mattered. Silence had never protected me before. They would have found another reason. I tilted my head back, staring at the sky, asking questions that dissolved in the air. Was I unworthy from the start? Did she ever love me? Or had I always been a burden she endured until someone gave her a reason to cast me aside? The fields gave no answer. Only the distant cry of a crow, harsh and lonely, circling overhead. My body trembled, but in that trembling came clarity. Last night was not the first time I had been discarded, it was simply the most honest. And honesty, brutal as it was, left me with nothing but the truth. I was alone now, and maybe that was the first step to being free. The night after I left the fields, I found myself in a low-rent motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the wallpaper peeled in curling strips, and the smell of bleach never truly covered the mildew. I had traded my last coins for the room, sliding them across the counter to a clerk who didn't bother to look me in the eyes. The key he gave me was attached to a splintered piece of wood with the number scratched in faded marker. When I opened the door, the room felt more like a cage than shelter. A single bulb swung faintly from the ceiling, and the bed sagged in the middle as though it carried the weight of 1,000 exhausted bodies before mine. I dropped onto it, fully clothed, shivering. My hair still smelled of rain. My skin still remembered the cold touch of the night she locked me out. Hunger pressed sharp inside me, louder even than the silence of the room. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I thought I heard her voice. Not the scream, not the final rejection, but the gentler tone she once used when I was small, when I lay feverish, and she sat by the bed, humming. The sound was so vivid it hurt. I opened my eyes quickly, forcing it away. That voice no longer belonged to me. What I had now was the reflection in the cracked mirror by the sink. I stepped toward it, clutching the counter for balance, and stared. The glass was fractured, splitting my face into pieces. One eye stared back from the left shard, my mouth from the right. It was like seeing myself as they must have seen me, broken, unwhole, easy to discard. I leaned closer until my breath fogged the surface, then wiped it away with my sleeve, watching the fragments clear. A sharp laugh broke from my throat, brittle and strange, because I realized the mirror showed the truth I had tried to hide. I was cracked, but I was still there. My pulse throbbed in my temples, hot against the chill of the room. Fever. The rain had seeped deep into me, leaving my body to burn and freeze at once. I collapsed onto the bed again, clutching my knees to my chest, listening to the hum of the bulb above. Time blurred. At some point, I woke with sweat soaking through my shirt, the sheets tangled around me like restraints. The fever pulled me into visions, her face looming over me, his grin widening, the slam of the door repeating until the sound was no longer wood, but thunder. I pressed my palms over my ears, but the storm was inside me. I begged silently for it to stop. The fever had a way of unraveling the lines between memory and present. I could not tell if I was still in the motel or back on the porch, with rain sliding down my neck. I felt small, smaller than I had ever been, like a child again, waiting for her to open the door. But the door never opened. The key rattled only in my mind. When dawn filtered through the curtains, the fever eased into a dull ache. My body trembled with weakness, yet my heart felt sharper. I sat up slowly, wrapping the thin blanket around my shoulders, and faced the light seeping in. For the first time since that night, I whispered to myself, not in despair, but in defiance, I survived. The motel room was ugly, the air heavy with mold, but it was mine for the night. No one could throw me out. No one could claim I had shamed them here. The thought steadied me. My throat burned, but I forced myself to drink from the tap-cold water, metallic yet bracing. It settled my stomach. I looked again at the mirror, at the fractures that divided my face, and something shifted. The cracks no longer looked like wounds, but like lines of a map leading outward. Each fracture pointed to a different direction, to possibilities I had not considered. The image was still broken, but it was also multiplied, showing that I could be more than the version they had cast away. I pressed my fingers to the glass until the cold stung. The pain felt clean. Outside, trucks roared past on the highway, carrying strangers to towns where they were expected, wanted, perhaps even loved. For a moment, jealousy cut through me. But beneath it, there was something else, something raw and new. The realization that I had nothing left of their world, and that emptiness meant I could build my own. It would not be easy. My body was still weak, my pockets still empty, my heart still raw. Yet even as the fever hummed through my veins, I knew last night had marked a turning. The worst had already been done. They had cast me out, they had declared me nothing. But I was still breathing in this cheap motel room, still thinking, still able to move. That was my proof. I pulled the blanket tighter and let my head rest against the wall. The paint flaked beneath my cheek, rough and real. I closed my eyes and whispered one question into the still air: if she could shut the door on me, why couldn't I open another for myself? The morning after the fever broke, I left the motel with the blanket folded under my arm, not because it was worth keeping, but because I wanted proof that I had owned something even for a night. The streets were quieter than usual, the shops still closed, the sky pale, as if drained of color. My steps felt heavy, yet there was a pulse of determination beneath the weight. I walked until I reached the edge of downtown, where a small diner sat with its neon sign buzzing faintly. The smell of coffee drifted into the air, sharp and grounding. I pushed the door open, the bell above jingling, and for a moment all eyes turned. My clothes still carried the creases of sleep, my hair still unwashed, but no one said a word. I slipped into a corner booth, hoping to disappear. A waitress with tired eyes and a pencil stuck in her bun approached. Her voice was flat, but not unkind, when she asked if I wanted anything. I told her the truth: I had no money. Something in my tone must have reached her, because she set down a glass of water, and later slid a plate with the ends of toast, muttering that it was a mistake order. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, as if it were the first food I had tasted in weeks. Warmth spread through me, not just from the bread, but from the fact that someone had given without demanding. I watched her move between tables, her hands carrying heavy trays, her shoulders stooped but steady. There was resilience in the way she wiped counters, the way she forced a smile at customers who barked orders. It stirred something in me. When she came back with coffee for another booth, I asked softly if the diner needed help. She studied me for a long moment, eyes narrowing as though measuring my strength, then scribbled a number on a napkin. "Come tomorrow," she said. That single sentence felt like a door cracking open. I clutched the napkin until my fingers hurt, afraid it might vanish. The rest of the day I wandered, but with lighter steps, the thought of work giving me a thread to follow. By evening, I found a laundromat with humming machines, and a man sweeping the floor let me wash the blanket in exchange for helping him fold sheets. The smell of detergent filled the air sharp and clean, and when I pulled the blanket out, it was no longer stained with mildew, but carried the scent of soap. I draped it over my shoulders as I left the night air cool, but no longer unbearable. For the first time since being thrown out, I felt a sliver of control return to me. It was fragile, like a candle against the wind, but it was mine. As I walked back to the bus station to rest, I whispered to myself that tomorrow I would not just survive, I would begin again. The next day, I returned to the diner with the napkin clutched in my hand, my stomach tight with both hunger and fear. The morning rush had just begun, the air thick with the smell of bacon and coffee, the sound of plates clattering against counters. The waitress from yesterday, whose name I learned was Ruth, handed me an apron without ceremony. "Start with the table," she said, and walked away as if there was nothing unusual about giving a stranger a chance. My hands shook at first, the rag slipping, the weight of stares from customers prickling my skin. But as minutes passed, I found rhythm in the small tasks, wiping crumbs, stacking plates, refilling cups with water. Each movement steadied me, reminding me that I could be useful, that I could exist without apology. By the time the lunch crowd poured in, sweat dampened my back, but I kept moving, driven by something deeper than pay. When Ruth pressed a few bills into my hand at the end of the shift, my throat tightened. It wasn't much, but it was mine. That evening, as I sat on the curb outside, the phone in my pocket buzzed. I hadn't heard it ring in days, but now it lit up again and again, the same number flashing, my mother's, then his. The calls stacked one after another, relentless. I let it ring until the sound burrowed into my skull. Finally, I pressed the phone to my ear, but I said nothing. Her voice filled the line, soft and honeyed, in a way I hadn't heard in years, asking me to come back, to forgive. Behind her words, I could hear his cough, the low murmur of his presence, as if reminding her what to say. My grip tightened around the phone. The toast I had eaten this morning settled like a stone in my stomach. They didn't want me. They wanted what I carried with me, my name on a document, the check that still came in my name, the benefits tied to my existence. It was not love, it was convenience. I let the silence stretch until her voice grew sharp, desperate. Then I hung up. My hand trembled, but my chest felt steady for the first time. When the phone rang again, I turned it face down on the concrete. I whispered into the night, "You closed the door, not me." The diner lights glowed behind me, warm against the dark, and I knew where I belonged now was not in their house, but in the fragile space I was beginning to build for myself. The calls continued, but they no longer sounded like commands. They sounded like echoes from a past that no longer owned me. I woke before sunrise. The city still hushed, the air cool against my skin. The diner's apron lay folded beside me, like proof of a life beginning to take shape. For the first time in weeks, my chest rose without the heavy drag of dread. I carried the blanket I had washed, its faint scent of soap clinging, and walked to the edge of town, where a small park sat empty. The benches were damp with dew, and I chose one beneath a crooked oak, the branches stretching above me like a roof no one could take away. The silence there felt different from the silence of rejection. It was not hollow, but gentle, filled with bird calls and the rustle of leaves. I sat with my hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee I had bought from the night clerk, its steam rising into the pale light. I thought of the girl who had stood shivering outside her own door, waiting for it to open. That girl still lived inside me, but she was no longer the whole of me. Work had given me a rhythm. Strangers had shown me small kindnesses, and in their absence, I had found my own voice, quiet maybe, but steady. The phone buzzed again in my pocket, but I didn't take it out. Their words could no longer pierce me. Instead, I listened to the hum of the waking world, the sound of buses starting, dogs barking from porches, life carrying on without their permission. My fingers tightened around the blanket, remembering how it once smelled of mildew, how it marked the night of my fever, and how now it smelled clean. It had transformed with me. A symbol not of abandonment, but of endurance. I lifted my face to the rising sun, its warmth brushing against my skin like the hand I had longed for, but never received. A question stirred inside me if I could survive being cast out by the person who should have loved me most, then what couldn't I survive? The thought filled me with a calm I had never known. I did not need revenge. I did not need their recognition. What I needed was this: my own breath, my own space, my own small beginning. The park, the coffee, the blanket, the proof that I was still here, unclaimed yet unbroken. When I rose from the bench, I felt taller, lighter. The day ahead did not frighten me. It waited open like a door I could finally walk through on my own terms. I carried my story forward like a scar that no longer bled, but still reminded me of the night I was pushed into the rain. In the weeks that followed, I built a fragile routine. Mornings at the diner gave me rhythm, the clatter of dishes, and the hiss of coffee machines weaving into a kind of music. Afternoons I walked through the park or the library, letting quiet fill me in, ways noise never had. Each small paycheck was folded into my pocket, with care a symbol that I could hold myself up, however modestly. Healing did not arrive all at once. Some nights I still woke with the echo of her words in my head, sharp and final, and the image of his satisfied grin. But over time, those memories dulled, losing their edge, replaced by new ones. Ruth handing me extra toast when she thought I looked pale, a customer. Leaving a tip folded into the corner of a napkin, the warmth of clean sheets on the bed I rented by the week. I began to see that family could be found in unexpected places, stitched together, not by blood, but by kindness. The blanket I once carried like a burden became a comfort. I would spread it on the grass beneath the oak tree in the park, sit cross-legged with a book in my lap, and let the sun filter through the branches. Each ray of light felt like a reminder that I had survived the storm, both outside and within. I thought often about forgiveness, not as something owed to them, but as something I owed myself. Holding on to anger was like gripping broken glass. It cut deeper the longer I refused to let go. So I began releasing it piece by piece, until what remained was not hate, but space for myself, for the life I was shaping. The lesson that carved itself into me was simple, but heavy. The people who should protect you are not always the ones who will, and their rejection does not define your worth. Blood may bind, but love is proven in action, not in name. I learned that my dignity was mine to keep, even when they tried to strip it away. I learned that sometimes survival is the most powerful victory, quiet, but unshakable. If you have ever been left out in the cold by the very people you trusted, most know that your story does not end there. You can carry yourself into new rooms, into new mornings, into a life that no longer depends on their approval. I found myself in the clatter of dishes, in the kindness of strangers, in the steady rise of my own breath. And you can find yourself too. We are more than the doors that have been shut on us. We are the steps we take afterward, the light we choose to walk toward, the dignity we refuse to surrender.